We have an amazing lineup. It is one of the most exciting things about doing an event like this are the people that we were able to invite to join us. We will have people, names I've already mentioned, but first we have Rue. Okay. Rue Angell is a landscape architect, campaigner, and lecturer with particular interest in urban spatial equity, practice of care, and the transformative potential of more than human cultures. After doing a BA in English literature, we graduated from an MLA from University of Sheffield in 2010. While living in Deptford for nearly 15 years, she became involved in multiple community organizations, and in 2012 co-founded Sayes Court, which successfully, and this is really important, successfully campaigned. There's lots of campaigning that goes on. Successfully campaigned to protect the site of a historic garden for community futures. We'll learn a little bit more about that from Rue. She's a lecturer at University of Greenwich across BA and MA courses, including design studio theory, history, methodologies. I think I've known Rue for about 10 years, and I'm never ceased to be amazed by what she's able to bring and her generosity in doing that. So Ruth, thank you.
First of all, thank you, Ed, and in fact, all of you. It's delightful to be invited to share Sayes Court with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to your thoughts about it, how you engage, and yes, the next couple of days, what we make of it together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do quite a brief overview of, just to expand a little bit more on what Ed's already told you about Sayes Court, how the project came about, some of its histories, and then just some first thoughts on the questions which you've been posed through this workshop. Those questions emerged through conversations between Ed and Sayes Court, and I think that we still want to keep them quite open, but some first things on our thoughts on it, and I'm sure we'll have time to expand on any questions and talk throughout the day as well.
Sorry, I was trying to make Ed co-host, but I don't think I can do that. If you see anyone come in, could you just admit them?
I will try. Okay. So yes, this is where we're going to be. This is where we're going to be later this afternoon. In spite of the fuzziness of this image, you can see whereabouts we are. If you know London, we're at the bottom of the Isle of Dogs. There's the Royal Naval College, and this enormous site, which is Conference Wharf. Development site that's been empty for well over 20 years. And down in this corner is the area which we're interested in at Sayes Court. And these are the development plans that emerged on the scene at various stages over the last 20 years. And as I say, as Ed has said, as a member of the community in Deptford, alongside a lot of other people, we were quite concerned about, well, what about this site? What about this site, which is the riverfront of Deptford? What does this say to it? What was already quite well known was the dockyard history of the site. It's former King's Yard, so the links with empire, trade, war, reach around the world from this site. Looking at it from the river, and this boundary wall, dockyard wall, the green on the other side of it is where Sayes Court was. But what was important about Sayes Court? So also, like, why are we even looking at the history of Sayes Court? Trying to, again, it goes back to that development site and within the community thinking, how do we challenge this in any meaningful way? And starting from a position of, can we make, instead of saying no, which, you know, just goes on and doesn't make any difference, can we make some positive proposals and try and get some backing behind that and see if we can gain some traction? So going into the history of it, other people were working on the naval history of it, but looking at the garden history, the site of John Evelyn's garden at Sayes Court is world-renowned significance, and yet the site itself is long gone. However, it hadn't actually been built on. So looking then into the histories of the site and how we could use them to create futures I was thinking about in engaging with all of you today about how we've engaged with research, and researchers have engaged with Sayes Court over the years. This has been 2012, but even before then, this is a long drawn out process. And over that, we've had some fantastic opportunities and connections. So this was the first research event that we did back in 2012 with the Gardens Trust. And this was we reached out to them and they were brilliant in connecting with us and setting up this day, at which we had speakers from Harvard GSD, University of Sheffield, British Library, Royal Society. And what that enabled us to do was to make a statement about the significance of this site, not just as a historic artifact, a paper artifact, but as a site itself. And from that to be able to, okay, right, the value of that research meant that we had traction to be able to take those ideas. What's significant about this site? What significance from as you've all seen in your programs about the work of John Evelyn as a innovator in sustainable planting, planting to clean the air, education, research. What in that is relevant to Deptford in 21st century? And this study day enables us to come through with a narrative which drew very clear links between the development that was happening, the surrounding neighbourhoods of Deptford, and the lack of opportunities that they were for bringing those two together. So in the first place, the most kind of obvious thing was to create an open space as part of this development, but that isn't enough of an argument when the developer wants to build lots of flats on it. So reaching into the history of Evelyn and the site and its connections in Deptford allowed us to create the idea of a project. It also enabled us to galvanise community support behind a sort of a positive idea of something which would create, is not about memory per se, it's about future and connecting very much to site. And the project which we ended up devising was to, yes, have the garden again, but also successfully campaigned to have what will be a new centre for research in landscape, urban landscape particularly, horticulture, training, bringing all of that together. I will tell you more about that as the day goes on. Again, so where researchers come in and what different kinds of data have been helpful to us and what sources have been helpful to us. This very complicated, very political planning, long drawn out planning event ended up being called in by then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and we had a very important element of the research and support we received at that time was from the National Trust, because the National Trust date their origins to this site as well. When long after Evelyn's time, his descendant wanted to create a public park for the people of Deptford on that garden site. The local authority couldn't take it on, and it was conversations about that the idea of the National Trust hold open space and sort of the access to heritage for the common good. So we got in touch with the National Trust and they said, that part of the history had been completely dismissed as insignificant in the developers' reports and statements about the site. However, for us, it was really important because it was about that connection. And so the National Trust commissioned reports underlining that statement of significance. and drawing through that narrative and getting behind it. You know, we had a representative of the National Trust here at planning hearing to put the weight of an institution behind the community project as well. We'll talk about a bit more about institutions in a moment, actually. So, I mean, however, we look down to this corner of the site as the boundary. We're visiting this site today. What managed to shift was the blocks had gone right up to their red line boundary. Now this will be public access, but research, training, gardens, open space with a centre based in the corner building there. We're still in the process of, you know, the next round of negotiations of exactly what, where, how much, but within the section 106, within the planning, it's a minimum of 1 hectare of open space and 1,500 square metres of building. Giving, you know, a bit more of a massing context for how that is going to work. It's which, as you will see, is not really started in spite of 2014 planning consent. One of the questions which we're coming into is about distribution of projects across sites and how this opens up. This is a piece of work that David Conn did for us some time ago. Again, it was in the support of our planning battle, and thinking, again, it's brought me back to thinking about what kinds of products are helpful to, have been helpful to us in the past. Things like data. You know, we're working in planning and we're working with developers. Numbers really help. Narrative, as I've already talked about, establishing that narrative is significant, and drawings, whether they are communicative, like this is the notional drawings, or saying exactly that bit of land, and that's how we're going to use it. And I know that you're going to be looking at all of those sorts of data and research production over the next couple of days. Site which we'll be visiting some of us later today. It is. that's a previous. Yeah, we've been over this site a few times, and it's it'll be fun to be back there with you. So yeah, so just wanted to have a quick look at some of these questions and our thoughts about it. Working across not just with Sayes Court, but other community, got involved with a lot of other community organisations in depth over this process, and it's messy, and it's complicated, and it's thick, and how you know, now being, working for the university, and that relationship back and forth, that is complicated as well, as Ed alluded to, and thinking about how to navigate the power dynamics, how to ensure that those engagements between research and communities are equitable rather than extractive. Particularly, I often struggle with student projects. Often I'm quite resistant to engaging with communities, because I know that the requirements of your design schedule and year curriculum can only offer such a small level of engagement, and what those expectations are from the community, from the students, can be so different that I'm wary of kind of spending people's time, energy, and commitment on that. So thinking about how we can do that in a much more thinking about how we can what other ways we could approach that, and how, on the other hand, in broader research, including beyond student projects, is how to resolve the needs of communities with funding aims, research aims, processes that we all have to deal with as well. So yes, I mean, it speaks for itself, equitable and meaningful engagements, but really pushing that, you know, thinking about how do we develop communities and individuals within communities to be full research partners with us in shared projects. What outcomes can they, as organisations, but also as individuals, gain from this? You know, that could they be co-investigators within these projects? Devising those shared values and aims at the start of any project. Of course, always thinking about, and this is where the sort of the thickness really comes in, is thinking about who is excluded from those engagements and how you might address those. Again, pretty straightforward. How data that's collected and generated to be made accessible to communities that are part of the society. Accessible in terms of format, in terms of content. I'm sure you will all have lots of ideas to bring on that. Something which I would like you also to consider is the amount of existing research which has already taken place over many tranches of engagement. In Deptford, we've had, you know, a lot of you have done projects around in and around Deptford. It's a very interesting set of circumstances. Those research engagements are often curtailed within that project that it is. However, every single one of them represents input from whether it's students or whoever else it is engaging, but it's also the effort and time of those members of the community who have contributed to that research as well, which maybe it hadn't been thought through at the time of how to make that live and valuable beyond that particular engagement. But here now, I'll be really interested to include and build on that, rather than, you know, it's exhausting starting from square one every time. And in terms of access, I think that we can be very creative about thinking about different, very specific access needs that might emerge in the site that you are engaging with. So it's both kind of general, but also what specifically in Deptford are the access needs. This is thinking about how it might be distributed across a wider area. That is a very broad question at the moment. I mean, the site itself, Convoys Wharf, Sayes Court, Deptford Dockyard, those are very widely distributed sites, whether spatially, in, you know, across time, in people, you know, like what that as a centre of gravity has meant, does mean, might mean, is a very broad spectrum. So thinking about what that engagement with communities can help to navigate that that distribution and make valuable that distribution. We want to be able to think about how, talking earlier about the equitable aspect of engaging with communities. It's so often the work of, you know, the exceptional individuals within those communities, but how does that work get supported? How, as the research which you might be generating with those communities, how could that be leveraged within those communities and within the projects? What sort of impact can that have? How much further it can go? How can it share agency amongst disparate members? And within that, we'll all be thinking about how do we position ourselves in relation to those communities we're working with? Something which we found early on working with Sayes Court is that you know, we went touting around all sorts of institutions, organisations looking for support. The vast majority said, amazing, we'd love to come back to us once we've got planning approval. We cannot risk our credit. You know, they have their political and funding requirements. And I wonder that as, you know, with the privilege of academic freedom, that is something that from our perspective, that weight that you can bring as with the backing of an institution where others may not be able to support. How can you work to address that power imbalance? The thinking in terms of that, understanding that communities are not unitary things, and that there is conflict, there are power struggles, there's scrapping over funds, there's all of this as well. How are you ready to engage and navigate with that? Yeah, those are the main things that I wanted to raise. Okay, so